Hi, I'm Tony from HuntPop Gaming, and in the previous video, we left off with this code. It allows our player to have a sprint functionality. If we press play and we run, we can hold down shift and run, we can hold down the other shift button and run, or we can switch to our controller, hold down the L1 button and run. But all of this functionality was done in a local script. But what we're going to look at today is having some run functionality attached to stamina. So we can have our player run, but they can only run for a certain period of time. As they run, their stamina bar is going to deplete. If you haven't seen that video, I'll quickly run you through what we've got. All we've got here is a local script. All our functionality is being done in that. We're going to change that in this video. But we've got the user input service, and this is to deal with any user inputs. So anything from a controller, a mouse, or a keyboard. We then get the player. We wait for their character to be added if it isn't already, and then we get the humanoid. We have two constant values, which is the run speed and the walk speed. And then from the user input service, sorry, I'm scrolling around a bit too much. From the user input service, we look for the input began event and the input ended event. We first of all check to make sure that this key input hasn't been processed by some Roblox GUI, and then we set our walk speed. So when its input began, we set it to whatever the run speed is. When its input ended, we set it to whatever the walk speed is. Then in our set walk speed, we're looking for the left shift button, the right shift button, or the L1 button. This allows players to work on a keyboard or work with a game controller. But that's all there is to it. If you want to know more details about it, go back and watch my previous video. I've left a link in the description below, and there's also a link on this video right now. But what we're going to look at today is how to turn this script into a script that allows us to have a stamina bar. The first thing I'm going to add here is the stamina max, and that's going to be equal to 100. Now there is going to be some logic around this because we're saying the player can't start running if they have no stamina left. Or rather, they have to go back to the walking speed when they've got no stamina left. Which means we can't have this logic of setting the humanoid's walk speed on the client. So whenever you've got a local script, it means that lives on that player's machine, which ultimately means they can manipulate and do whatever they want with it. So we can't really trust this value. So what we're going to do, I'll zoom on that script just to make it a bit easier to read. And because we know we're going to be trying to interact between a local script and a server script, we're going to need an event. This is what's going to allow us to connect between the server script and the client script. So coming back over to the local script, what I want to do is get the replicated storage where we've put our event, and all I want to do is get the running event and fire the server. And I'm just going to pass the value test just to make sure that this is hooked up correctly. Now to hook it up, I need to come into the server script and once again get the replicated storage, and then we're going to get that running event that's in replicated storage and say when the server event is fired, or rather on server event, and then we're going to run some function. Now because I know I'm going to be doing a little bit more with this, I'm not just going to pass the function in here. I'm going to create a new function. I'm going to call this update stamina. So this server event fires, it calls update stamina. And what it does by default, although we've called fire server with test, it's also going to pass in a player. So the first value that we get is the player, which is a type of player. Now just adding these data types here just help me with the IntelliSense, and so I can see what values are on that data type. And the other value that we get is, I'm just going to call this, I'll just call it a value. And this is a string. It's not a sting, it's a string. And what I'm going to do is print out this value just to make sure that it works. So what I'm expecting is that we fire the server, we get test, and then test is printed to the console. But only when I press the shift button. No, not when I just press the shift button, because outside that condition, so every time any value gets pressed, so even when I click the mouse, we get the value. So we can see that's hooked up fine. So I can come in here, Get rid of that. And what we want to do now is we're looking at making sure that our player can run and have their stamina run down as they run. So what we want to do now is make sure we can have a player that's running and the stamina reduces as they run. So first thing that we want to do is get a stamina bar on screen. Now, you could come to the starter GUI and add a stamina bar. That's perfectly reasonable. I'll zoom out here. And what I'll do is I'm going to put a stamina bar in here. So what we do is we get a frame. So this is a new local instance of a frame. And we also get a new instance of the screen GUI. So the frame here is the stamina bar, which is all highlighted down here. And I set some default values. Its size, where it's going to be located, its background color, and set its parent to be the screen GUI. Then I set this screen GUI parent to belong to the player GUI of our local player. Now, realistically, what I can actually do is get this, change it to player. So when we run it now, we can see we've got a stamina bar at the bottom of our screen. At the moment, it doesn't do anything because we haven't hooked it up, but that's our next task. So what we can do here is get rid of setting the speed in there. I'm going to move the call to the server inside of our condition. Then I come over to the server script, and here we've got our player. And I just want to make sure that I'm able to set the player's walk speed on the server. So that's going to be equal to 50. I'm just doing this little by little so you can see how we slowly build up some new functionality when we're creating a game in Roblox. Get rid of that tool grip editor again, it keeps coming back. If I'm running, I hold down shift. And here we are, it works perfectly fine. If I release shift, it's not working. So let's see why. The reason is that I call set walk speed. I then say, if the input code is any of these, we're going to fire the server. And when we fire the server, the walk speed is set to 50. So when the input begins, it is going to match one of these. So we set the walk speed to 50. And when it ends, it's going to match one of these. And once again, we set the walk speed to 50. So now we need to change the logic slightly. So instead of having a value, because this is no longer of any use to us, I'm going to have an isRunning value and a speed value. The other thing I want to do is take the run speed and the walk speed and add them to my server script, because I'm going to use these values and check against them to make sure that the only value that is being passed up for speed is equal to the run speed or the walk speed that I expect. So we'll use this running parameter a little bit later, but for now we're only interested in the speed. And what we're saying is, if the run speed that's passed is equal to the run speed that we've got up here, or the walk speed that's passed is equal to the walk speed, then we'll set it to whichever one that's been passed. However, if it doesn't match one of those two, we're automatically going to set it to walk speed. I'll quickly run that. You can see it doesn't work. I don't know why. Because I'm not passing the correct values. Let's get rid of test that we're passing. And this will satisfy the second condition. But the first condition is a Boolean to say, is the player running? So what we're doing here is making a check to say, is the speed that's being passed equal to a run speed? If it is, the first value that gets passed is true. If it's not, the first value that gets passed is false. And then we pass whatever the speed is. So now if we run it, get rid of the tool grip editor again, start walking, hold down shift, I run, release, and then walk again. So that's working nicely. We can now move on to the next stage, which is reducing the stamina. Once again, this is logic that lives on the server script. And the way we're going to do this is track the player's current stamina and start to reduce it once they're running. Now, the way I'm choosing to do this is I'm connecting to the player added event so that whenever a player is added to the game, we create a new number value and we attach that to that player. So then this is going to allow us to manipulate this server side, and then we can read the value that's on the player, on the client side, to change the display that the user sees, which will stop anyone being able to manipulate it. Let's take a look at how that works. So here we've set the speed of the user, but what we want to do now is get the stamina, and then we're going to run a while loop. So we're going to say while the stamina value is greater than 0, and while the user is running, and while the humanoid move direction magnitude is greater than 0, then we're going to do something. And that something is going to take that stamina that is being set against the player. We're going to take the value, minus it by 10, and make sure this value never goes below 0. Then what we're going to do is make the loop. Then what we need to do is make the loop wait for 0.1 of a second before it iterates again. So before this is going to work, what we need to do is come over to the local script, and we're going to need to add some functionality that's going to update this stamina bar based on the values that's been set in the server script. Now we can do that by getting the run service, then connecting to the heartbeat event and passing in the function. Now at the top here, we've got a player. So we can use that player in our heartbeat function and get the stamina, which we've set up here. So these two values must be exactly the same. Then I'm saying if we get stamina, which we know we will do, but if this happens to run a touch before this gets added, that could throw an error. So we're adding a bit of defensive code here. So what we're saying is if we get stamina, then we're going to take the stamina bar, which we've set up here, and take its size, and we're going to reduce the size of the stamina bar. Then, just to make it look a little bit nicer, what we're going to do is get the background colour of the stamina bar, and we're going to change the colour based on the value that's in the stamina bar. So as this goes further and further down, it heads to more of a red colour. Close that again, start running. You can see the stamina bar goes down, but it doesn't come back up, it doesn't stop us from running. But we've got the next stage in place. So we can now go back to our server script, and what we want to implement is regenerating the stamina bar when our run has stopped. So to do that, I'm going to create a new function, call that a local function, and we'll call it revive stamina bar. In here, we're going to pass the player. I'll set its data type so I can work with it a bit easier. Then the first thing we're going to get from that player is the stamina, which we originally set up here. And then we reduce down here. Then from that player, we're going to get their humanoid. And next, we're going to write a while loop, which kind of does the reverse of what this is doing. So what this is saying is while the stamina value is less than 100, we want to do something. And that something is updating the stamina value, making sure this value doesn't exceed 100, and incrementing it by 10 each time. So then what we do, we call revive stamina bar at the bottom here. We walk, we hold down shift, it goes down, release shift, and it comes back up. If I keep running, I'm going to hold down shift, and I'm not going to release shift. You can see it comes straight back up. If I hold down shift again, it comes straight back up. So that's a problem that we've got now. Each time we fix a problem, we're going to create ourselves a new problem. So let's quickly fix this one. Now, I think this problem might be caused by the fact that our passing is running through, and there's no check on that up here. So what we're going to need is a class variable, a script variable, and we'll call that isRunning. Then in here, we're going to set isRunning to be whatever the value is that's been passed in. We'll update the isRunning property here. So we're now looking against this one, which doesn't mean too much for this piece of code. However, we're now going to say, well, stamina value is less than 100 and we're not running. So this will only then get updated when you release the shift button. Hold down shift, and there we go. It doesn't start coming back up until I release the shift button, and we get our energy bar back, at which point I can walk, release, and go back to walking. So that's working pretty well. But now we have a problem that if I run out of stamina, I can still carry on running. We really don't want that. It kind of defeats the entire purpose of this stamina bar. So if we press stop, and then what we can do is simply take the humanoid walk speed, and then what will happen is this loop will continue all the time the value is greater than 0, but as soon as it's out, we'll break down to the walk. Hold down shift, forward arrow, and we don't run. But if I hold down forward arrow, then shift, we do run. And when we come to the end of it, we're down to the walking speed, I release shift, my energy bar goes back up, hold down shift again, and I do run. But notice that we've now got a new problem. If I hold down shift first, then I try and walk, my player just walks. I'm not getting that run. And I don't want players to have to know that they've got to run first and then hold shift. I just want it just to work. So let's press stop and fix what I hope is the final problem. Now this problem will be caused because of the key combos that we've got in our local script. Because if we look, input began, we're saying if it's one of the shift buttons or the L button, then we'll fire the server. And it comes over to here and it's saying, as long as we're moving, then we'll start to deplete the stamina bar. We wouldn't want the stamina bar to deplete when they're not moving, but equally we've got to find a way to handle this. Now, the best way that I can come up to handle this is take the logic out of here. So the set walk speed does only one thing, and that's called the server script. And then what we want to do is have a new local function that's responsible for only saying whether a user has sprint enabled or not. So we'll call this is sprint enabled, and we want to know, is the shift button pressed? And we also want to know, is the player moving in some direction? Now all I've done here for the sake of this tutorial is focus on the keyboard commands. So what we're going to say is shift pressed, and if the move button's pressed, then we're going to say the sprint is enabled. Otherwise, we're going to say it's not. Then instead of calling set walk speed directly, we're going to call it inside this condition. Now we also don't want to just call set walk speed here. We need some condition that wraps around it, because now set walk speed is just straight away calling the server without doing anything else. And if it was to release a different key, we don't want this to call the server and change any values. So the only time I'm interested in the sprint stopping is when the left shift or right shift has been updated. Obviously for yourselves, that might be when the L1 button or the R1 button has changed as well. But now if we press play, close that, start off by walking, hold down shift, and we run, we go back to a walk, release the shift, and before it goes back up to full, if I press shift again, we can have our sprint take place without having to wait for the full bar to replenish. Or if I hold down shift first and then the arrow key, it works. If I'm running in this direction, I've got that direction or the A button, they all work. And all of our logic sits on the server, which means this isn't going to be manipulated back from the client. And that's everything I've got for the sprint with stamina bar. If you liked it, give a thumbs up, subscribe, and if you have any questions, leave them in the comments below. I'll be happy to answer them. I'm Tony from Humpop Gaming, and I'll see you in the next one.